Okay.
Great. Well, I can begin by introducing us and introducing today's speaker for the 6th in a series of monthly webinars on transformations for sustainability that is coordinated by SCORAI, the Sustainable Consumption Action and Research Initiative. Just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on scorai.net. So it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Halina Brown to speak about multi-stakeholder collaboration toward climate action. Dr. Brown is a co-founder of this network and a scholar of technology, policy, and cultural transformations for a sustainable future, focusing much of her work on the building and mobility sectors. SCORAI functions as an international knowledge network of researchers and practitioners who are committed to building a flourishing and ecologically sound society by changing the way that we consume. And a key part of this project includes building a deeper understanding of opportunities and challenges for sustainability transformations in institutions and the economy at the local level, which is the focus of today's webinar. Professor Brown, in addition to being a co-founder and executive board member of SCORAI, is an energy activist in her home city of Newton, Massachusetts, serving as a co-chair of the Citizens Commission on Energy. She's co-authored 3 books, Corporate Environmentalism in a Global Economy, Effective Environmental Regulation, Lessons from Poland's Experience, and Innovations in Sustainable Consumption. I've had the opportunity to learn from Halina's broad experience at the interface of global and national and local environmental policy since I took courses from her a decade ago in environmental policy, toxicology, and risk assessment at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, where she has conducted research and taught since 1985. She's published and consulted widely on the role of the modern corporation and sustainable development and the interplay of technology, culture, and institutions in achieving sustainability transitions and transformation. And she has been instrumental in collaborative efforts in Massachusetts for initiatives to retrofit housing and urban systems for sustainability in the context of the global climate crisis, focusing on working towards equity and sustainable well-being. So with that, I'm really looking forward to your talk today, Halina, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz, for this generous introduction. Nothing is more rewarding in this life than a former student becoming a colleague, an accomplished colleague. So this is one of these days. So I would like to tell a story today of Newton, Massachusetts, where I live, and the process that evolved actually over time of how we collaborate towards climate action, right? So let me try to analyze it a bit conceptually. So cities have an important role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They can experiment and provide models for other cities. Experiments on a small scale are always less risky and more adaptable. They have an ability to connect directly with households, build on personal relationships and networks, adapt policies to local circumstances. They can regulate, especially the land use and buildings, and they can purchase green electricity through aggregation for their residents. I put these asterisks here to remind myself that I want to show you 2 examples of these statements. This is over time, it shows in the aggregation, in electricity aggregation in Massachusetts, the percent of renewable energy that was purchased in the aggregation. And you can see that until Newton, the red bar adopted 62% of renewables, all with except one city in Newton was just buying 5% renewables. But once Newton did it, look what happened. Town after town, city after city we're doing the same thing. And this is the power of the first mover, how they can set the stage for other cities and municipalities. Okay, this is another example. This is another example of what I say here, that they can connect with households. Look here, this is actually taken from Oregon, but what that shows is that households represent 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. This is based on consumption-based inventory, not just local emissions inventory. So if that's the case, cities have an enormous role to play, of course. Okay, a few other things that matter, especially on a city level. Here you see how carbon footprint of a household depends on its income. Once again, this is taken from Oregon because they are ahead of everybody with the consumption-based inventories. And you can see this tremendous relationship. The higher the income, the higher the footprint. And of course, it also challenges us to figure out how to adapt policies for these different income groups, because one policy is not going to be equally effective in these different groups. Okay, and the last thing is sort of to show what matters and where the greenhouse gases come from is the size of the house and the level of insulation in the house, the construction. So here you have, this house is half the size of this house, all right? And you see when both are built to an existing building code. In other words, they comply with the law, but don't do anything beyond that. The difference is tremendous. It's almost, it goes from 135 something to, it's a little less than half the reduction just from the size of the house. Now, if you also put very high insulation in these two houses, you get a house which is now in brown, right? So you can go, so if you have a smaller house, highly insulated, comparing with twice as large a house, building just to building code, you get almost 2.5 times difference in emissions. Huge. Okay. So, okay, but cities not only have advantages, they also face certain challenges. They have limited resources. They're not really accustomed to dealing with household energy issues. They high public participation, which is common on a city level, often leads actually to resistance to change. Lots of people don't want to change. They feel ambivalent. The government feels ambivalent about telling what to do in their private lives. So there is this ambiguity that pervades everything. And they do have limited authority. For example, in Massachusetts, the building code is set by the state, and we on a city level cannot require higher level of construction. Okay, so let me introduce the conceptual framework that I will use, and I will come back to it at the very end. So in telling this story, how the system evolve in Newton, I want to think about it from the angle of higher order learning. This is based on excellent work by many people in different areas of social sciences. I especially use Sean and Rain, Fisher and Wenger. And essentially, higher order learning means radical change in either one of those levels of aggregation. Problem definition, or in a more broadly, how you interpret observation, which means interpretive frame that each of us has or groups share, or worldview, which is much deeper mental construct that has to do with values. Values, personal values, professional values. So it results, what's most important is that it results from feedback loops between the new experiences and the existing mental constructs, such as problem definition, interpretive frame, worldview. It occurs in various circumstances, but especially well when different communities of practice interact in a project or a problem to solve, especially if they have a common language and a general agreement of where they want to go. And it's very much facilitated by a sense of urgency and a common language. Okay, so about Newton. Newton is in the state of Massachusetts. It's located here on this dot here. That's a northeast of the United States, very blue state, liberal, always votes blue, Democratic in national elections, though we have a Republican governor. Newton has a population of 90,000. It's a medium to smaller city. It's very white. It's very wealthy, has a very high level of education. Almost 80% of people have bachelor's and higher. Average home sale price is very high. I just heard that today it's 1.3 million actually. Excellent schools, excellent amenities, excellent services, excellent location. It's only a few miles from downtown Boston. And its history of climate action is actually very modest. What city has until now focused was how to improve buildings that belong to the municipality, which represent only 3% of total emissions. Okay, so it's a great place to live if you can afford it. And these are some pictures. You see the great outdoors, recreation, public transit directly to downtown Boston, beautiful nature. This high school, we call it Taj Mahal, and a very beautiful but old and leaky housing stock, residential housing stock. So here is this is the inventory of greenhouse gas emissions in Newton. It's a little old. It was based on 2013 data, quite old, but not a lot has changed. We are in the process of updating it right now as we speak. What you see here is very important, is when you add the residential, when you add the residential electricity consumption, residential heating, and residential transportation, you end up with 62% of direct emissions. This is not consumption-based inventory. This is direct emissions inventory, which is huge. We don't have an industry. We have businesses that commercially is somewhat smaller. We have natural gas leaks, and waste and municipal operations are minor. So if we want to move the needle on these emissions, and our ambition is to get to zero in 2050, we really have to focus heavily on the residential sector. So let me introduce to you the key players in this drama. All right, I do it again in the context of a conceptual framework of Flixton and Adam, which they call, this is in their rendering, strategic action field, defined as a constructive social order in which actors interact on the basis of overlapping interests, shared understanding about the field's purpose, relationships to each other, rules governing legitimate action. So their individual interests may be very different, but there is a certain agreement in the direction that we're going. So these are the key actors in this drama. The mayor and the city administration, right? They pull the strings of money and administrative procedures. The city council, very large, 24 elected councillors for a city of 90,000. That's another story. Their job is legislative job, okay? They pass new legislations, which we call here ordinances. Citizens Commission on Energy, which I chair. This is a very interesting player in this story, established during the Carter administration energy energy crisis since 1979. It's 9 members appointed by the mayor, city council, school committee, and 2 other important organizations. These are all volunteers, and they are experts on different dimensions of energy, right? And their approach is very techy. They do technical analysis and policy advice, but we are also advocates. So we are bridging advocacy people with the city and the technical people in the city. And then there is a group of civil society organizations. I will not go through them all because there is no time. Okay, so this is the beginning, year 0, before I start year 1 of this story. So why year 0 was very important. The city decides to purchase aggregated electricity in Newton, which means they buy all the electricity on behalf of all citizens of Newton. It allows them to negotiate the price. It allows them to have greater price stability, and it allows them to request that the provider of electricity puts in some level of renewable electricity. So the city was quietly doing this. They considered it an entirely administrative internal matter. They were thinking of some renewables in the mix, maybe 5, maybe up to 15%, something like that. But the grassroots and the Energy Commission got a wind of it, that was happening, organized and made a very strong demand that we have a voice about how much renewable electricity is in the mix. We didn't just ask for it, we did a lot toward it. We designed, implemented, and analyzed a survey of residents on their willingness to pay. We analyzed the costs. We made public presentations all over the place. We lobbied individually the city council so that the city council could put pressure on the mayor, and the result was astounding. The first contract in 2018 was 62% renewables from the regional wind and solar. Of course, these are RECs, the renewable energy credits. Not all of it are really green electrons, but that's the direction we are going. This was a tremendous lesson in organizing and mobilizing, and prepared us to year 1 creating the climate action plan. So the rest of my talk is about how we created climate action plan and how we started its implementation, focusing mostly on people and organizations, how this worked out, not so much on technical details of what's in there. So here we go. Very quickly, it emerged, it actually already emerged from year 0 of our activities was this. Landscape somehow changes. The city reacts to changes in the landscape, and I will show you what I mean. And makes a move which creates an opportunity. Energy Commission moves with its analysis recommendations. Civil society agrees with the Energy Commission and begins its campaign, and city takes action in a direction that hopefully we are asking for. So this is the general model. Here what happened in chapter 1, creating the climate action plan, is the landscape change. In 2016, Trump came to presidency, withdrew from Paris Accords, and the result was that cities and states in the US started mobilizing. We have to compensate for what the federal government is not doing. City level emission inventories have become the norm by then. So there are lots of emission inventories, and these inventories, time and time again, point toward households as key drivers of greenhouse gas emissions in cities like Newton, many thousands, tens of thousands of cities, which do not have any major industries in them. So this is the landscape. Second step, city creates opportunity window. Well, what happens here is that we had a newly elected mayor, elected 2017, who very narrowly win on environmental platform. That's what pushed her over the hump. So she commits to have a climate action plan in the first year. She hires a consultant, but very quickly we realized that this consultant, while strong on public participation, is not very technical, and they're not going to deliver anything that will point to really Newton-specific, tailored to Newton set of goals, metrics, and actions. All right. So what do we do? Energy step 3, which is we get mobilized. Energy Commission embarks on a parallel preemptive effort of creating climate action plan. It's a very, to this day, I am so grateful to my colleagues that worked for half a year as volunteers. We worked really hard, but we analyzed the housing stock, population, house ownership turnover, car use and turnover, opportunities in new construction, projection, and so on. We gave detailed recommendations, numerical goals, metrics that are derived from what we learn about Newton, okay? So 8 months later, from the beginning of all this, I walked into the office of the mayor and her key lieutenant and put the citizens' climate action plan on their desk. I did it before the consultant hired by the city had anything to present. And of course, the civil society organization very much stood up in support of the Energy Commission and this climate action plan. We presented it subsequently, formally, also to the city council, but I met with every city council and gave them personally a copy of it. So it's a big document, 100-something pages. So, so this was a big step. The city, okay, so this is what it looks like. And essentially, this is what it did. It had protection, business as usual, how to reach 0 to 2050, all analyzed. Essentially, this is what it had. It said what needs to happen, goals and metrics, how it should happen, specific action, and who should do what. Mayor, city council, civil society, energy commission, and the utility companies, which we recommended successfully. The city signed a memorandum of understanding of that they will help us with some of the actions. Okay, so nobody can ignore this. This document is lying there on these desks. So city council adopts unanimously Citizens Climate Action Plan and instructs the administration to prepare Newton Climate Action Plan, somehow drawing on our plan. In essence, the president of the city council said to the mayor, to the sustainability director, do something to combine these two documents, for heaven's sake, so we can move ahead. We don't need two different plans competing within the one city, which is what happened. So for the next couple of months, we were negotiating the administration, the city councils, and the Energy Commission negotiated about the content of the city climate action plan. The biggest thing was when they finally adopted it in December, and it was also unanimously adopted by, voted for in city council, what it had, which the city did not originally plan for, was it had very specific numerical goals to hold the city accountable. It had specific metrics to follow up progress, and it emphasized households. Initially, the city was quite unsure whether to focus only on municipal operations or on all the sources of emission, which is what really needs. All right. And extremely important, despite the financial crisis of the city, the COVID now is beginning, mayor creates new position for energy coach. There were several positions that were eliminated at that time from the city payroll, but she did create a new position for this project. That was a very strong sign of support. So this is the picture of the city official climate action plan, use less and green the rest. Right? But look at it, it only tries to cover 20 to 25. They were not quite ready to go to 2050, but officially, but they really did, unofficial. Okay, year 2, implementation. So this is this past year, okay? We're going back to the same model, all right? How do we move? Look at the landscape changes, see what opportunities the city creates as a result of it. Energy Commission takes the first step, civil society joins in with their campaigns, and the city responds by taking steps. So number 1, landscape changes, all right? So now Newton is seen as a leader because of this very high content of renewables we have, by far the leader in Massachusetts. So that creates pride for the mayor, who really never saw herself as environmental mayor, but it also creates expectations. So that softens our fight, right? Neighboring towns also begin to do other creative things. 2 neighborhood towns are trying to ban all gas hookups in new constructions. So this is a lesson for Newton. If they can do it, why can't we, right? And at this point, Energy Commission and grassroots organizations have very strong legitimacy as partners, as co-workers in some form or another with the city, though they still see us as the outsiders, all right? Number 2, city creates window of opportunity. New aggregation contract, the first contract was less than 2 years. New aggregation, we are now at 80%. You see what becoming a leader and having expectations does to a city. There are ongoing revisions in the zoning code, where that's a great opportunity to affect land use and the kind of buildings we build. And generally, several additional staff members who are doing other things are pulled now towards sustainability. So now sustainability is a serious theme, all right? So what do we do? What can we do as the first preemptive step? One thing Energy Commission does is we focus on residential housing very much as the most difficult to tackle. And we create something called Energy Coach website. If you type newtonenergycoach.org, you will see it. It's a website that allows residents to actually make appointments, personal appointments with, right now there are 9 experts standby in different areas having to do with energy and climate, upgrades of houses, solar, ground source heat pumps, whatever you think that is related to climate and housing, you will find that there are about 150 to 200 questions that are answered on the site. But the main thing is that you can make an appointment and speak to an expert, a person, all right? That lowers the barrier for a lot of people to take action. And we also took the energy rating. Right now in Massachusetts, all the new constructions for the past 11 years has to have energy rating. It's called HERS rating. And we posted these ratings on the assessor's database. So if you go to the Newton assessor's database, which has a map of all the properties that have this rating, the new properties, have these numbers there. This is by way of beginning to change the whole conversation in Newton. And what do civil society organizations do? They design city sustainability websites. These are all volunteers, but remember the educational level in Newton. They create a communication working group and design a communication strategy, a task force, citizen task force formed around electric vehicles. There is a building standards committee that is really an amazing group. They negotiate directly, not through the city, but directly with large developers in the city. And as a result of it, they started before, about 3 years before actually. There is a huge development going up, and about 3/4 of all the units there are built to the passive house standard, and it's fully electrified. All right, so this is what the civil society is doing. Right? And we, of course, all know each other. Some people serve on more than one committee. All right. City reacts. What does city do in its reaction? It forms multi-stakeholder working groups. These are very important. So now you have groups working on different topics, and these groups, the members of these groups are Energy Commission, city employees from the administration, and grassroots people. And if you walk into these meetings, you don't know who represents which community of practice. You don't know who is collecting salaries and who is not for this. They have really become over time sort of totally integrated groups from these three sectors. The city deeply engages and commits to residential retrofits. The city culture evolves by now. So many people from the city are constantly interacting with the rest of the players in this drama that they realize that in order to move the needle on climate implementation in Newton, climate and equity, we also added equity as two existential problems in Newton, they have to be part of every department and every committee, all right? They call it climate and equity in everything. And the city council has been quiet during the past year because they were instrumental in adopting the plan, but they have not been very busy with implementation because right now we've been doing things that only administration needs to do. So, but they are now discussing a standing subcommittee of the city council that will take all the proposals for new policies, new ordinances that have to do with climate and energy. Okay, so let me start analyzing. All right, so as you can see, the conditions for higher order learning were superb in it. If you still remember how I described it, we had 3 communities of practice interact in a joint project. They had a shared understanding of the purpose as equity and climate as existential issues and Newton's responsibility for climate action. They had pretty much a common language, and they had a sense of urgency, which was increased by the fact that earlier successes create expectations. They are looking at us, all the 360-something cities and towns in Massachusetts who are thinking about taking climate action are looking now at Newton. Okay, so these are great conditions for higher order learning, and this is what I see as higher order learning that has happened. Okay, so I already mentioned inside the administration, climate and equity is in everything, and they are truly trying to implement it, whether it's a commission that looks at historic districts, whether they're looking at affordable housing, whatever, there always has to be a question, what about climate? How are we going to contribute to climate protection? This is an extremely important point. City Hall recognizes that external stakeholders are not external. We're not any, the grassroots and the Energy Commission are no longer giving advice to the city or demanding something. I mean, we do that, but it's no longer doing just that. What we do is we strategize and think together and choose tactics together. That's a very, very different mode of operations that I have ever seen in these situations. The Energy Commission is recognized as a bridge between city and grassroots. We are both techies, but we also have an agenda so we also advocate. Legislative branch now, this is very interesting. At the last week presentation of the progress of this plan to the city council, city councilors said, why aren't we part of this work? So that is, of course, what we were hoping for. That was what my hidden agenda was going into that meeting. And now, so this is what we created. It's a group called Strategic Implementation Working Group forms. As of this is all the last 2 weeks. Chaired not by anybody from the city, not anybody by Energy Commission, is chaired by a grassroots leader who happens to be also a leader of interfaith groups. And in it, there will be representatives of city council in addition to the executive branch. So the members are executive branch, legislative branch, Energy Commission, and civil society. And this is how we are now going to go forward. Maybe there will be others like big business in the area and so on, but this is a very new mode of operation. So we have a very big agenda, of course, for 2021. I won't make a list here. I'll be happy to answer questions. At this point, I will stop. I spoke for about 33 minutes, as I promised, so we have some time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Halina. So some of you have already entered a few questions into the question and answer box. You can also raise your hand and have the opportunity to verbally pose a question for Halina. So I see that there is a hand up from Marlene. I will go ahead and give you the mic so that you can ask your question.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Hello.
Hi, hi Marlene.
Hello. It's so nice to see you. And I've been hearing informally about all of the work that you've been doing. And so I definitely wanted to tune in from Switzerland and hear you. So my question is about shared purpose and imaginaries. I would imagine that somehow when you talk about an energy transition, some people may see the more obvious solutions, the energy efficiency solutions, let's say, as long as they're not too costly, how to maybe retrofit homes, change light bulbs, this kind of stuff. But then there's another discourse, which is around energy sufficiency, reducing consumption, moving to smaller homes. I'm just wondering, was there a bit of a challenge in terms of getting people on the same page towards more of a sufficiency angle, or how did you navigate the tensions?
Well, it's an excellent question. As you hear me, as you listen to me, this is a plan to reduce consumption without ever mentioning consumption, okay? Because so we haven't, right now, we are focusing on retrofitting houses, the efficiency. But it's clear, but because that in itself is extremely challenging. There are, despite the fact that there are very large subsidies and we are now increasing the help, people are not interested in energy climate. They consider it's just not a priority, right? So we are focusing on that, but at the same time, we are introducing the conversation with the with the people who are trying to get to retrofit their houses, to begin to see the sufficiency element. I don't know if you noticed when I said that we posted the energy performance of all the houses on the database, on the assessor's database, right? These metrics include not only the insulation and the envelope of a house and its heating system, but also the size. Okay, so we only introducing at this point the conversation, all right, that your house a very poor score because it is very large. Now, I also mentioned that the city has now embarked on revising of its zoning code. This is where we have an opportunity to start talking about smaller houses. I have to tell you that when I, on behalf of the Energy Commission and the Grassroots, introduced this topic to the City Council, it was put aside. This was something that the City Council was not ready to take up. This was much too much in conflict with the idea of everybody being a king in their own castle on their piece of land. And so we have other ways that we will approach to get at it, but you cannot talk about it right now in Newton. People are not ready. And even people who are ready to talk about consumption in their own personal lives, they prefer not really to look at it too hard. So we're not there. We're not there.
Thank you, Halina.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. And this actually, I think, is an interesting bridge into a question that was posed anonymously in the chat, looking at sort of both the potential synergy, but also tension between the goals of climate action and action for equity at the community level. And so the chat makes the point that sustainability is often advertised as a project or a sort of attribute that's attainable by wealthy, educated, and often white communities. But based on the data, some of which we looked at today, there's a apparent correlation between increasing wealth and levels of education and house size and energy consumption. So the question posed here is, why are those communities often perceived as more sustainable versus a low-income community with smaller living spaces? And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about the tension in that conversation, both within community members and city leadership.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how this idea has originated that the more educated with more income are more sustainable. Of course, they are less sustainable. You saw the footprint of people with larger incomes. The way we are trying to deal with, and people often see the climate action and social justice access as competing with each other. So the way we are trying to do it in Newton, you could see, is unaffordable to people who are, I don't know, I guess it's only the 5–10% of all income in this country could possibly now. I've lived here for 40 years, so I come from the days when professional class could still buy a house here. But now enormous wealth is moving. And what we're trying to do is to take, during the zoning redesign, first of all, to mandate that the village centers, the city is divided into 11 so-called villages, which have commercial centers. And that the only houses that can be built near that those village centers are small and dense. So we hope to create more affordable, and they also have to have a minimum number of low-income units. So this is how we're pushing for more affordability that would also benefit climate, right? There are also, you saw these houses. Newton has 25% of Newton residents are 65 and older. And you can see why. We moved here when we could still afford the city. People would like to downsize, but don't have, there are no small units available in Newton. So we are trying to pave the way to renovate these magnificent Victorian structures and break them down, insulate them, make them really energy, highly energy efficient, and break them up into smaller units. All right, but this is why it was so important to bring city councilors into our working group, because it's the city council that's going to make this decision. So we are building a constituency within the council. And so we have to act, as you see, we have to act at technical level, campaign level, and political level, all at the same time, in order to push this together. And to get there, we have to all become part of the inside. We cannot be just advisors. We have to be sometimes annoying insiders.
Great. And kind of bridging off this, what would you identify as the greatest challenges in seeking and getting support for what ultimately I think is a really amazing kind of success story? You know, was resistance coming from civil society or from elected leaders, or was it really more a matter of education? And this is a question posed by Elizabeth Klein.
No, I don't think that it's just education. Outreach and education have been tried and tried and tried, and we know it has some impact, and then it levels off. It impacts a certain group of people, and once these people have been reached, it essentially plateaus. So now there are more clever ways of doing outreach, and we are working on it. All right, people person to person and so on and so forth. So we're looking for improved method, but the challenge, that's not the challenge. This can be done between the city administration and the grassroots. The challenge is that in order to really move residents to do something, and they have to do it with their houses, we need more than outreach. We need regulations, right? And we need certain regulations. I won't go into it. We need sticks together with the carrots, and to come up with regulations. For that we have to go to the city council. The city council is going right now. City council is like 3, 3, and 3. There are the gang-ho climate people, there are the moderates, and there are very conservative people. All right, so that's where the battle is going to be fought. We have special election in March for two more city council. There are 2 seats empty, and you should see the bloody campaign, because everybody knows that this is really an election between pro-development and against development, right? And there are even some ugly things circulating that resemble Trump versus no Trump type of language, right? That's where the fight is going to be in year number 2.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask a question posed by Harlan Rivas Cooper in the chat here. What does the participation look like among local businesses and industry in the community?
I can't at this point. I focus today only on residential. We are going to create a green leadership collaborative with the big businesses here, and sign memoranda of understanding with them so that they have their own personal private climate action plans. But and we have like the top 20 businesses are representing most of the greenhouse gas emissions. But because of COVID, we had to put it on hold because the businesses were just not paying attention. So it will pick up next year when things resolve.
Good, interesting. I'm going to go now to another hand up from Philip. So Philip, I'll give you the microphone here.
Okay. Thanks, Halina, for your presentation, and hello, everybody. I don't know how many people are here on the call. So I want to come back to Marlene's point in two ways. One is that here in America, talking directly about sufficiency is really a non-starter, or reducing consumption or things like that. We are not there. But I'd like to share with you something that came up just in the last few weeks here among our group, and that is the idea of somehow inducing citizens to make their own climate action plans for their family, for themselves, maybe for their business, and for their organizations, their sports organization or their church or whatever. So this idea is just in an early phase. We would like to hear from other experiences. It all depends on how you communicate that plan to the citizens. But the challenge here is to follow up on what Halina said, is to make it personal for people, not just something that the city or that the Energy Commission is doing, but that is everybody's responsibility. And just to add one more point, the easiest thing for a person in Newton is to buy an electric vehicle. And it's not picking up. I mean, we are hardly ahead of any other places in America. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because, again, it's a certain sector of the population who has that income to be, in a position to make those choices about their transportation upgrades. So there's a question here from Katrina Gapschmeling asking about sort of the infrastructure recommendations, and specifically if there have been any projects or proposals for local heat networks with renewables. So in terms of making recommendations for.
Very little. The utilities, the local utilities are actually organizing right now pilots with getting some neighborhoods to agree to completely electrify their homes, and yeah, but that's an initiative from the utilities. What we are trying to do, of course, is now that everybody in Newton has 80% renewables in their electricity, the big push is for people to switch from gas heat. Gas is predominant. Gas heat to electricity. But in contrast with insulation is very highly subsidized. You can get 90% of the cost covered. But electrifying a house is more complex project, depends on the house, and it's expensive. So that's as far as we're going with it. But as I said, we are trying to, in new construction, to basically outlaw new gas connections. But we don't build a lot in Newton. Newton is pretty much built out. It's an old city. So that will have a lot, it will have political impact. Other cities, as you see, cities follow Newton, and it's an investment in the future, but it will not have an immediate significant reduction of greenhouse gases now.
Right. There's a question here from Tom D'Alessio. Is Newton part of any regional or national network of cities who are doing climate action plans? And if so, like, how has that kind of influenced or informed the approaches taken?
City is a member of USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network, but I think it's a pretty dormant relationship at this point. So the learning that comes to the city comes largely from the rest of us. You know, people, the Energy Commission members and many grassroots people are very much connected to what goes on out there, and we bring this to the table.
Right, and it does seem like there's this evidence of more informal networks of sort of Newton now becoming a leader that is influencing the policy decisions taken in surrounding municipalities. So there's sort of this informal diffusion that I think we are seeing, in both ways.
Right, diffusion driven a little bit by healthy competitive spirit. When neighboring city, for the first time, Brookline raised their aggregation renewables to, I think, 30%, 20%, something like that. We said we can do better, and we went 62%. So it's a very healthy kind of rivalry.
Absolutely. Going back in the chat, there's a question from Valerie Brachia asking who provided the technical data and analysis for the Citizens Commission. So, you highlighted that this was largely a volunteer-led. Okay.
We did it. We did it. We figured out how to get data and where. So and we broke it up into different who knew what. But for example, I was spending quite a bit of time with the assessor to figure out what the housing stock looked like, how often people sell houses, because whenever you sell them, there is an opportunity to do something what we want, and so on. But there was a lot of this is also computerized data. These are databases. So one of my colleagues, Jonathan Klein, who is a wizard, he owns a consulting firm. He's a wizard with that. He took a lot of data that existed already and analyzed it in many different ways until we understood what the picture was. So the fact that we have this Energy Commission of people who were willing to put so much time in it and who have this high level expertise was crucial. At some point I organized breakfast between a few members and a few city councilors, because they never met each other, and for the purpose so that the city council will walk away and say, wow, look at these people. I mean, they look at their expertise. So that's, we did it.
Great. And there's a few questions here that kind of go back to the beginning to reflect on and dig into the question of talking about higher order learning and essentially like how that framework is kind of informing your understanding of the process as it's taken place in Newton. And somebody also asked at the beginning about, conspiracy theories and potentially like mistrust of climate science and how that could be influencing public receptiveness.
We don't experience. Let me start with the second one. We don't experience it because Newton is a very highly educated, socially progressive city, and we have many Nobel laureates from Harvard and MIT live in Newton because of its very convenient location. So the problem of distrust in science is not a problem here. What was the first question about?
Just the higher order learning concept, framework. And
I find it very useful to apply it because it shows you that as long as we can remind ourselves that we agree on what that big umbrella is under which we are functioning, that we agree that Newton has a responsibility. Some people don't think so. They say, what's little Newton, right, versus China? But if we agree on that, and we agree that it can be done if we really develop a good strategy and tactics and push people to actually do something that may be inconvenient or maybe cost them something, that we want to contribute to climate protection. So this is a big umbrella. As long as this umbrella is there, we are able to interact with each other. And it's on this boundary levels of interaction where learning takes place. There was the sustainability director, co-director in Newton, in the very beginning of it, said, why do we need a plan? We know what to do. And then a year later, she said, wow, we were wrong. I was wrong. All right. So there is learning going on as long as we avoid any kind of personal attacks and just keep working on issues. But there are different people, you know, there are some who are very risk averse in this group, others who are willing to transgress and they say, I'm sorry, instead of asking permission, right? And so on. So you have to, yeah. It's very human project. This is institutional, but within this relatively small institutions on the city level, it's also very human.
Thank you. And I think this is a really nice note to wrap up on. I'm realizing that we are at the end of our hour for the presentation. Several great questions that I think would be really interesting to continue as listserv conversations with the SCORAI network related to how this local action may translate up and inform state level or more regional scale action, and questions about thinking through sort of strategies for mobility and sustainability. So I'll let us adjourn now, but want to encourage everyone, if you're not already a member of the SCORAI network, you can sign up at scorai.net and continue engaging in this conversation and future webinars coming up in this series. So thank you all for joining this morning. And thank you, Halina, for a fantastic presentation about your lessons learned.
Thank you for the questions. Okay, bye-bye.